Welcome to the Bridge of Truth. My special guest this week is Jason Wood. Jason is an energy medicine therapist who incorporates spiritual guidance, Reiki, sound, and nature-based traditions in his private practice. And it was my great pleasure to meet Jason about 4 or 5 months ago during a rather fortuitous event that was being held to celebrate the end of the Mayan calendar and the date of the apocalypse, supposed apocalypse. And it ended up being a wonderful day of change for me. Having met Jason, the advertisement said that he was going to be doing a sound healing ceremony. And I had no idea of what to expect. And I walk into a room and he's surrounded by about a dozen large bowls and gongs and tribal drums, and ended up giving a demonstration that was really quite powerful and special. And I knew at that moment that I wanted to have him on my show. So welcome today, Jason.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I wanted to, first of all, begin, if you can, by telling us how you started to do this. What brought you to this place where you felt you wanted to explore this type of energy?
Yeah, again, I just want to say thank you for having me come on board and the work that you're doing, because you're bringing this beautiful message to a lot of people, not just with me, but with all your guests that you've had on, which is wonderful, because there's this beautiful thing that I see happening and occurring at a large level, where people are becoming more interested in trying to understand themselves in a different light. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's funny how I got into this, because it was not the path that I was going on. I wasn't in any way saying I'm going to be working with sound, or I'm going to be working with Reiki, or or even working with the energy system, because I grew up in a Judeo-Christian home, and it was actually Pentecostal, non-denominational, and really this environment that saw reality in a very specific way, which was Jesus Christ died on the cross. Mm-hmm. And there was no steering away from that. And there was no understanding of this energy system. In fact, if you talked about it, that you were almost demonized. So there was a lot of fear surrounding that. But I ended up going to a Christian college and started majoring in psychology. And
so was your issue then not Christianity, but just the way that it seemed to be?
Right, not at all with Christianity, and not at all with Jesus Christ. But how it was taught within the tradition that I was growing up in. I just don't think they had a full understanding of what the message of Christ was. Since Christ is a big part of my own healing and part of my growth and who I am as a human being. But I only make that statement about what I grew up in because it was so anti any of this stuff. So it's kind of interesting, because I think we are souls that come into this body that want to experience certain lessons. And it's just interesting to me that my soul decided to experience itself in that capacity. Anyways, when I went to a Christian college, and I remember leaving that college, I was introduced to Sonia Kierkegaard, Paul Tillich, and a lot of these thinkers of the Christian tradition that really unpackaged Christianity for me in a different light. And started really allowing me to see that maybe Christianity could be expressed in a different way than what I was taught. And that's a really important part of my foundation, because if I hadn't allowed that expansion, then I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing now.
Sure.
And then when I got out of college, a gentleman was was very, I worked in foster care for the longest time, when the foster parents had this really calm and loving demeanor about him. And I was just blown away by who he was. And he started expressing to me that he was really into the Buddhist tradition. And I remember he gave me a book, the Dalai Lama, I think it was The Art of Happiness or something like that. And I remember reading this book and just really being blown away about what I was reading. So again, this was another thing that just opened me up. And so I look back at my life and I see this continually expansion. So let's fast forward. I was on the path to become a counselor, a psychotherapist.
About what year was that?
When I
at this point in your life. So
right, yeah. So I graduated from my undergrad in '97.
Okay.
So it was about '98.
Okay.
And there are a bunch of other things that happened that really unpackaged Christianity for me in a different light. That I just won't go into details about because it would take a lot of time. Mm-hmm. But I was on this path with an undergrad in psychology. I knew I wanted to get a master's in counseling so I can begin doing psychotherapy. Right. And that's what I was going to be doing. I worked in a lot of nonprofits, working with at-risk youth or youth that were pulled from their homes. We moved to New Jersey, my wife and I. Eventually I got married. I started a graduate program up here. And my last year, and I had been reading about the Hindu tradition, so I was aware of the chakras.
Right.
But I had never had a tangible experience of that chakra system or of the energy system. My last year of graduate school, I started going to this yoga studio that did a lot of tapping. I started going to acupuncturists because my friend had told me about this experience that he had. Going to this acupuncturist about these shifts he was experiencing, this energy that he was experiencing. It was really fascinating me, and I wanted to experience it for myself. So I went to this woman. She also was running a yoga studio. And January of 2010, and is this making sense? I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to be rambling too much.
No, but I think it's important to set the stage.
Yeah,
and that was actually the reason why I wanted to have you on the show, because it could have very easily ended with the ceremony that I filmed for you. I'd like to mention that Jason has a wonderful video that I produced for him, and I encourage people to see it. So yeah, I think it's really important because aside from the show that I saw you do, when I spoke to you and then I heard your background, I said, no, this is an individual that I would really like to interview because there's a lot more depth here. So yeah, please.
Yeah.
Let us set the stage for this, because we've all had this sort of progression in life that leads to some sort of tremendous event.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's been so much wisdom from my past that has brought me to where I'm at now, that I've been able to unpackage some of the hurts, some of the traumas of the past and understand the wisdom in them, which is beautiful. But so I was going to this yoga studio, and really it was just with the intention for more spiritual development. That has always been my heart and my goal, is to try to understand the great mystery, God, on a more individual basis.
Right.
And now that it was kind of through my process of life opening, so it wasn't only one tradition, not only the Christian tradition or the Buddhist tradition or the Hindu tradition. It had really been unpackaged to open up truth in all areas. And so I was going to this yoga studio hoping, again, to unpackage that and understand God more. And in January 2010, and I had some really interesting experiences when I started doing this tapping. I remember one time being in my bed and laying next to my wife, sleeping, and waking up and not being able to move at all.
Really?
And it was the first time I ever experienced it. And I wasn't dreaming. I just could not move my body. And I was scared, and I remember all I could do.
Do you know?
Well, part of the process of the tapping and releasing the energy was it was really, a lot of these methods were utilized to change the energy system. And so what I went back and was asking my teacher, like, what's happening? And she says, your body is just adjusting to the new energy that's flowing through you, because prior to this experience, your whole energy system had been shut down. And now that it's opening up, the energy's coming in and it's trying to rewire and reconnect in a way that your body's just not used to. Mm-hmm. Another experience that I had, I remember going outside to walk my dog. And as I walked outside the door, this like bolt on top of my head just jolted me. And again, I was like, I've never experienced something like this before. What's going on? So I was starting to have these small energetic experiences that I knew I was tapping into something. And so January 2010, I went to one of their seminars, and it was a weekend course. And the goal of the seminar was to help you tap into your higher self. And it was done through a number of exercises. I remember one of them was you would look at somebody's eyes and just stare at them. And so this was a stranger that you didn't know, but you were trying to make this soul connection. And at first it was really uncomfortable. Mm. But then you broke through this thing where something opened up, and it was beautiful. One of the exercises they had us do was to really ask ourselves what we want while holding a position. And it was the first time in my life I had really asked from a soul level. And when I say a soul level, a level that wasn't intellectual, it wasn't trying to figure anything out, because that was a lot of process of my spirituality, right, was trying to figure out. But it was at this really cut level. And I was in tears. And what came out of it was this idea that what I really wanted was freedom. I wanted freedom. And a week after that training, and that in itself was really powerful, because I touched something that was real. And it was beyond thought. It was beyond beyond the physical. It was something very spiritual. But a week later, I was in my car, and that bolt of lightning that I felt really, I had been reading about Kundalini.
Right, sure.
And all that energy exploding, and I was real interested in that. But this energy just hit me, and for all my chakras, I felt start expanding and vibrating in a way I never felt before. And I had no real language or real words to understand what was going on. I remember calling my teacher up and being like, what's going on with me? This is really strange.
How long did it last?
For 3 months of really intense.
You mean you felt this energy going on like this?
Yeah, for 3 months. That's crazy. Was really intense. I was, at the time, I was working for the state of New Jersey as a social worker, and I couldn't concentrate on my job. My wife, who I love and is very beautiful, didn't have a language or understand what was going on either. And so it was, and then when I talked to my yoga teacher, she knew a little bit, but really couldn't give me, I wanted to have something to cling on to say, this is what's happening.
Right, exactly.
But I had nothing. And so this energy, and there were times I would feel my heart just expand, and I would start crying, and I would have this tremendous love. And then the funny thing is, so this is happening to me, and my wounds were being emotional wounds, my trauma wounds,
sure,
were still present. And so they were still impacting my ego. And I really see that that's what the ego is there for, to really protect us. It's there to protect us. So I thought I was really special when all this was happening. I thought, wow, who am I? And I started going to this spiritual master, and I went with the intention for him to say, "Oh, Jason's really special."
Right.
and
You're promoted to the head of the class.
Right, exactly. And he's okay. But instead, what I meant was, we're going to have you begin really looking at yourself and really look at who you are and start taking responsibility and ownership of what you are becoming. Mm. And prior to that, I'd really bought into this whole idea of being a victim, that things were happening to me. It was my dad, it was growing up in the house that I grew up in, whatever. Never really taking responsibility. And he, for 8 months, it was not about promoting me being special. It was about really me becoming center and really letting go and doing probably the most scariest things I had to do, because one of the tasks was to really be honest about everything that I was. And prior to that, I had done a lot of hiding. Mm. So coming and being honest was it was hard. And it was the best thing that I ever experienced. So this is a long way to really talk about how I got into the work that I'm doing, but it's a really strong foundation on when I'm doing my work, that my main role is creating a space. Mm-hmm. A space that allows each individual to open up and become, instead of me coming in, which is a lot of, I think if you're a good psychologist, you don't do this, but in a lot of Western psychology, the ideal is, I'm coming to fix you. You're coming to me, and I'm going to fix you.
That's Western medicine in general.
Right. And this process is not about fixing at all. Right. It's not about me being up here. And so what I'm talking about is how I had to really go through this process to really, I'm not better than, I'm not worse than, I am. And that's really, that work needed to happen before I started doing this energy work.
Did you get an explanation for what had happened to you, for what that energy was? Or did your master not even want you to consider that?
Right. And I think this is with the Buddhist tradition too, and a lot of the traditions. It's easy to get stuck in phenomena. So these things that happen in the physical realm, like I experienced this physical sensation, or I saw that shard of light, and get attached to that instead of really going back and just being centered in your being. And so I think he never gave me that offer. But I really think what was happening was there was a rewiring of my whole energy system. And what began to happen in that rewiring is I started, at the time I was doing my internship, and I started seeing stuff around people. I would start seeing shards of light. I would start seeing this movement that prior to that experience, I didn't see any of that. I saw no phenomenon, nothing. Mm. And I started really being able to tap into someone's emotional story without them really saying anything. And I think all of that was really this process of, this is what it means. When I begin my ceremonies, one of the prayers that I do is this idea of us remembering who we are. And that the experience that I went through, I think, was really demonstrating to me that we really have forgotten who we are as a human race and what we're capable of becoming. And we are capable of doing so much more than what we say and think we can do. So I never got any real answers about what was happening except intuitively. And I work with guides, spirit guides, and from their understanding, from what they've told me. And this is something that I had that intense experience for 3 months, but it didn't go away. It's been a part of my process now, and It's a part of the process that I use in my healing. It's part of the process I use in my ceremonies. So that's really what began the work and what I started. I was hired at a practice. I was a private practice where I was going to start doing my supervision to become a psychotherapist. And I remember my intuition, my heart, or my voice telling me, no, you can't do that. Maybe sometime down the road, but you need to start working with energy. And that was one of the scary things that I had to do. What stopped my path of becoming a psychotherapist and start working with energy? Are you nuts? Are you crazy? Because in my mind, I need to pay the bills.
Right.
I need to take care of my family. And my fears, although were coming up, I had learned that I had to trust my heart and just go through them. So I started my own private practice out of my house, and I started doing this work.
So what exactly did working with energy mean to you when you get this message?
I think at the time I knew something was going on with my hands. And I think that might come from my early upbringings, being in a Pentecostal movement, where we had many nights when they would do a laying on of hands, right, and people would fall down. And so Jesus, there was this reference a lot to him using his hands to heal other people. So that's where I went and said, I need to learn how to use this energy in my hands.
Okay.
And so synchronistically, I was led to Reiki.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first introduction to the energy work, besides the experience that I was having and the material that I was reading.
Briefly say what Reiki is, just for people.
So Reiki is a Japanese healing arts. It came out of Japan. Mm-hmm. Reiki in Japanese means universal life force. So the idea that once someone is attuned to Reiki, and that's the biggest thing with Reiki, is that you, through your teacher or through a master, you get attuned to the Reiki energy. And that's the only way that you have access to Reiki, to the universal life energy. So through the attunement, you then learn symbols. So then you become a conduit and a channel for this Reiki, universal life energy. Mm. And through symbols and hand placement, you then begin to work with a subtle energy system, with a chakra system. You can work somewhat with trauma too, that might be stored in the body. But what's really happening is this life force energy, which is also prana, chi, sure, Holy Spirit, is going to those places that need to be healed, to rebalance them, to unblock them. Dr. Usui is the gentleman that found it or rediscovered it. Some believe that this has been a tradition that's been going on for a while. And that was in the late 1800s. And there's lots of information out on Reiki now. It's one of those traditions that is really, the West seems to be pretty embracing, because there are a lot of Reiki practitioners out there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I know there are many different energy therapies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I happen to practice Jo Ray, and there's pranic healing, and a number of my guests have been practicing other forms of healing.
Oh, absolutely.
Rising Star and others.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and Reiki was just really the foundation for me, and for a while, I was really excited about it, and then I reached a level where I just wanted to learn something more. So there are other modalities that I began to become interested in, and for a while, didn't want to admit that I was a Reiki practitioner for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But have since, in the last year, become really excited about Reiki again.
So how did you then take it into a way, as you described, that you needed to be able to support your family and turn it into a livelihood.
Yeah, so I just started seeing people out of my house. And at first I did advertising. I was doing expos.
Right.
I had business cards that I was, but none of that seemed to really bring much, or as far as people coming to me. I noticed what began to happen was when I really stepped into this belief about who I am, being an energy healer, or not even necessarily that, because I think it's a trap to identify I'm a healer.
Right.
But just in a belief in what I was doing, because when I first started doing it, it was like, am I really going to do this? And so it's kind of a meek energy. It was like a real. And then I started, as time went on, I was like, yes, this is what I'm doing. I have a voice and I can speak it. And as I stepped into that energy, then it started really opening up, and I didn't do any advertising. I stopped doing advertising.
And just word of mouth, people began.
Yeah. And it was a lot of synchronicity, which I think is beautiful when you begin to step into this and you begin to follow your heart. Synchronicity is one of the most profound things that happens.
Sure, absolutely.
This magic that just occurs.
All during the process of the 12 years that I wrote my book, it happened constantly. I even write about it in my book.
It's exciting. It gets me really excited.
Still to this day, it still happens, and I give thanks when it does, because you bow and you recognize it. Yeah. And the idea is to keep yourself open to seeing those possibilities when they happen, rather than being focused that the message has to be seen in a certain way, and then you miss what's really being told to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, in your bio that I put on the site to describe what we're going to do today, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about how trauma is stored in the body, which you described, but then how sound therapy can release this. And so you're working with energy. Where did you move into sound then, as a result of that?
So one summer, I think it was about 2 years ago. Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. I'd been working with sound. I had wrote this or read this book by Leonard Horowitz, which is called The Healing Codes. Mm-hmm. And in it, he talks about the discovery of these frequencies called the solfeggio frequencies, which he, along with another doctor, because they were both doctors, wrote this book. And the whole idea was that they had discovered these frequencies in numbers in the Bible, and the book Numbers. And the actual chapter, it might be 23 or something. But it's a beautiful book. But they introduced this idea that these ancient frequencies had been around for a long, long, long time, and then were used for healing, were used to connect us to Source again, but that they had been lost. And they believe that they were lost purposefully. That in 1913, the Rockefeller Society made this huge movement to try to get all the instruments tuned. So it was 1913 or 1917, tuned to 440 hertz.
Right.
Which they believe is probably the most disharmonious frequency to introduce into our human experience. So the idea is that these frequencies have been around for a while. They're used by the Gregorian chants, Bach, that all these great musicians were using them, and it connected them right to Source. And I read that and I was like, I want to know more about this. And so what I began to discover is that there were these tuning forks that you can get that are made to these solfeggio frequencies. And so I got trained in them through somatic energetics, which is this guy's name is David Hussel, who he has a book out about it too, about his experience. Has doing these trainings on these tuning forks and how to use them to heal the body. And so I did that training. And I had some really cool experiences. But then I went down to Spring Lake for a summer vacation with my family. And a yoga studio was doing the crystal singing bowls. And I had experienced one. My yoga teacher would use a crystal at the end of the session. And I really liked it. So I went to this session, and it was an hour long. And she had 7 for each of the chakras. And my body just lit up. It was like I was plugged into the wall.
So after you had the experience, that's what drew you to want to duplicate.
Yeah, and it wasn't just necessarily the experience and the phenomenon, but what happened afterwards, the following day and the following week, was I began to have these aha moments about some of the issues that I was experiencing in my life.
I see.
So there was this space that was created for me to say, ah, and then walk through it. And that, if I had just had the phenomenon, then it wouldn't resonate with me as much.
So you felt that these vibrations were actually releasing things that had been held in your body?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the idea is that the bowls are all toned to our chakra system.
Right.
And they tone in such a way that they entrain and and when I use the word entrainment is this idea that by hearing the sound, that the chakra will vibrate to that sound. So there's this process of entrainment that goes on. And then by doing that, then there becomes this release. Does that make sense? Do I make sense?
Well, yeah, I kind of talk about it in my book too, and maybe at some point in time we can continue the discussion along those lines. I talk of it in terms of harmonic alignment. Right. And frequency resonance, and that's actually a principle that the entire universe is based on.
Yeah.
And
right, I remember you telling me.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about that. Maybe even do something on my website specifically directed to that. But then now, to take us to present day, I know you wanted to talk about the more conceptual, the idea of love versus fear, and the vibration associated with that.
Yeah, and I think that is tied into this idea that we store trauma in our body, and that has been part of my healing process, and that's why I really gravitate toward energy work instead of Western psychology, is because Western psychology has a tendency to talk about a trauma that occurs, a past memory from when you were a child or even to now, and just kind of rehash it and talk about it, and hope in that process of talking about it that it will restructure it or reframe it so that it no longer impacts you. Mm-hmm. What energy work does is this trauma, and the work by Brent Boehm has some wonderful books out there, and a doctor out in New Zealand called Dover recognized that a millisecond before a trauma occurs, that it gets stored into the body. And it gets stored in the body because the emotions get so overwhelming when we're young that we don't know how to deal with them.
You said before?
Right. So the height of the traumatic experience. So you may have some yelling that's occurring, or maybe you're in an accident, and just before you hit the situation leading up to it, the body's recognizing, oh, this is going to be too hard for me to handle. So it gets frozen into the body. And then what the body is doing is it's actually trying to protect you from having to experience those emotions. But inevitably what begins to happen is now we walk through life, we've had this traumatic experience, and it's stored in our body, not necessarily in our brain, but in our body. We have this traumatic experience, and as we get older, something reminds us of that experience, and then we get triggered. And so instead of responding to it in a present moment, we revert back to what had happened in the past, mm-hmm. and we create these behaviors to then try to prevent us from experiencing that pain again. And they say that we get triggered Brent Boehm and Dover, say that we then get triggered 15 to 50 times within an hour. And they've talked about this idea that 5% of our life is ruled by our conscious thoughts. 95% is ruled by our unconscious thoughts, our subconscious thoughts. And so the idea is that these subconscious thoughts are coming from this stored information in the body. And so so when we bring it then to this idea of love and fear, love to me is this idea of being able to really be in this present moment, to not have any agenda on it, to experience it completely without projecting these thoughts onto it. Just let it be just as it is. That's difficult to do when you have these traumatic experiences that you're holding in your body. Because what happens is the present moment comes up and we begin to project all this stuff onto that present moment. And until those traumas are healed, it's very difficult to see the present moment as a blank space, whereas really where love occurs. The other, with a trauma, is really you're projecting all this fear onto the situation. And that fear is really set up because you're telling yourself, I need to be protected. I need to be protected from being hurt. Because in the past I was hurt. So if it's very difficult, like I said, it's very difficult to move into this place of love if there hasn't been some work on that stuff.
And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy then.
Right.
Because you're moving, you approach what's happening now based upon your past, expecting it to turn out a certain way, and the mere fact that you're expecting it to turn out a certain way helps to actually cause it to turn out that way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's then very difficult to experience love from another human being.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because I'm not seeing you for who you really are. I'm projecting all this stuff onto you. And I want you to be this way for me to feel safe. Or I feel like you want me to be this way. Mm-hmm. All this stuff that's going on.
So how do we get past all that? Is it possible?
Yeah.
Can we be completely clear?
I think it's an unfoldment. And I'd say that just from my own personal experience. That I'm constantly peeling away at this onion with myself and getting to a core deeper and deeper. But where I used to be 2 or 3 years ago before I began doing this work on myself, I had all this judgment about me because I had all these old stories inside of me. And now I have this acceptance that I never thought was possible. And how is that done? Well, in the work that I do, is all this idea about creating space. So a trauma gets into your body, becomes this dense energy, and becomes really just this trigger point. So you're just like being pushed. Mm-hmm. So the energy work and the sound work, what it begins to do is it begins to create a space in that dense energy that's in your field, creates a space, so then you can step back from it instead of being triggered, and you can begin to understand the lessons and the wisdom that's in that experience. And once you begin to understand the wisdom and the lesson from it, then you can walk through it. But that space needs to be created in order for you to be able to do that, or else you're just reacting to it.
So it's not just enough then to play a bowl and create a sound. You have to then become a counselor too.
Sure, right. Or at least facilitate an environment where a person and an individual can begin to talk about it. And I guess that is the role of a counselor.
Yeah. I mean, because they would need to be guided. I mean, it's kind of like tossing them out into the real world, and all these things are happening, and they can't discuss what to do with their new wisdom or feelings, and in some cases it could be even you're burying pain and you bring that pain up and it's going to hurt.
Yeah, and I think in the past, and that's why I love the nature-based traditions, that was part of the community.
Right.
That there was this environment that was supported by the community to talk about that and process that. But now, because our culture is just not set up that way, that probably a counselor or somebody within that field is needed to help that process. But my hope would be that the community would be able to do that for an individual.
Right.
Whether it be their wife or whether it be their boyfriend or
in
a partner.
As you have done with a healing center, where you bring people together to actually accomplish that. And I've tried to do it with the Bridge of Truth, because I believe in that concept too. Yeah. That people come together and people have their strengths, and they combine the strengths and really accomplish something.
Yeah.
You talked about the idea of sound and vibration, and one of the things that I was thinking of, and what I wrote about in my book, is the idea of how sound being out of phase. I actually have to do this lots of times in fixing some of the files that I work with, where you're dealing with noise. And one of the ways to remove noise is to find the frequency that the noise is, but then get it out of phase. And when you combine the two, it neutralizes.
Oh, that's awesome.
So on some level, I would imagine, and I've talked about it, if love and fear are opposite, equal and opposite energy, so to speak, you can neutralize the fear by bringing love into the situation. You can apply that to just about anything in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah. There's so much research out there right now on sound and its power. And I don't feel like I've done justice to the work that's being done out there and what we've talked about. 'Cause everything is a frequency. Yeah. And that's to the food we eat.
Absolutely.
Everything has a frequency. And that frequency, one of the things, and Greg Braden, I remember watching a video of his, and one of the things that he talked about was that this idea of the research that's being done and how DNA is affected by our emotions. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the research that's been in DNA is that we've been able to identify a certain portion of it, but the rest of it, I think it's, and I may be completely wrong, 95% of our DNA we haven't identified, and we just have called it junk DNA because we just don't know we don't know what it's there for. And Greg Braden, in his work and the research that he's done, is that love is this high frequency, which creates this open space. I mean, that's what love does. It creates this open space. And that's a high frequency. Fear is this low frequency, and it creates this heavy space, this density. And what he saw in his research and what he's identified is that the love, if someone experiences love, that it actually connects the DNA and gets them functioning in the way that they can or ought to. So this idea that if we're in this love process, that we're able to really become more fully human than what. And Joseph Chilton Pierce has this whole research on this ideal that we have these the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, the neocortex, and that most of us really function in the reptilian brain because our culture is really this fear-based, this dense energy. Mm-hmm. And in his research, what he's noticed is that when you're in this love, that you're no longer in this fear, and now you can begin to expand. And not only do you have access to the mammalian brain, but you have now access to the neocortex. And then there's this link that begins to happen between the neocortex and the heart. And so now you become even more fully human. And so again, it goes back to this idea that us remembering who we are. And I think love really plays a big part in that. And if you don't, and not love in this emotional feeling thing, but love as a law, as a law of nature. I don't know if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Does it? No?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So
I mean, natural law is what the universe is founded on.
Right.
Conscious beings, began to evolve, how many 10 billion years maybe after the actual 5 billion years after the universe was actually birthed. It all pre-existed and was developed according to natural law. I'm getting a couple of questions, and I want to answer this before we start your thing. Terry's going, this is so cool. Where can I take one of these classes that work with sound vibration?
The Omega Institute, there's actually one, I think, coming up in the end of May to June. One of my inspirations, who is Jonathan Goldman, who's done a lot of great work on sound, has beautiful CDs out. He's offering coursework on actually how to use your voice for healing. And a lot of his work is on using your voice, because the voice is a powerful thing. I do these ceremonies three times a month.
Right, you do them pretty much in Bergen County.
Ridgewood.
That's where we are.
And Montclair. I'm starting to do them in Montclair. I have one on May 19th down in Montclair. Yeah, and there's yoga studios that are beginning to do them everywhere.
You're building your own?
Right. I have a space in Hawthorne where I'm doing a wellness center, a holistic wellness center, and a yoga studio. Well, we'll be proud. My hope is to do, if not once a week, to do maybe every other night, where I'm doing a sound healing meditation, because they're that powerful. They have that great of an impact.
Right. So definitely check on the links. I'll have them posted on YouTube, or you can see it on the Bridge of Truth on Jason's homepage. And click on that. Get in touch with him. He'll give you his exact schedule, let you know what's going on. And Shannon wants to know, how can I use sound healing to go from fear to grace?
That's a great question. Yeah. I think it goes back to this idea of what we were talking about before, where the healing of trauma and creating space in that trauma is really important to be able to step into that place of grace. I know, and maybe I don't have Shannon's definition of grace and what that actually is, but in my experience, I was going through this process, and the first year that
maybe peace might be the word.
Yeah,
because grace has a religious.
But grace is a huge thing, because to me, and I'm just gonna see if this resonates with Shannon, is part of my process was going back to try to understand the wisdom of why I went through what I went through. And I didn't really talk about my childhood experience, which was filled with a lot of fear. But there was, in the year that I was developing my practice, I was going through a lot of stuff between my wife and myself. And at many times I felt like I was alone. I finally had reached this place, and then this thing of grace, where I felt that I wasn't alone, that there was this divine thing that was always present.
Oh, that's the point. Yeah, it was always there.
Was always leading me through it.
Just the fear was sort of blocking you from
that
and the
fear didn't allow me to have that space to see that. Fear kept me in this dense place.
Yeah.
And so what the sound began to do, and one of the bowls I started working with, because one of my chakras that was really out, well, there were two, was my heart chakra, which is all about unconditional love, and my solar plexus, which is all about power. All of them were really off. And so I was using the heart chakra bowl over and over again. Every night I was doing that. And what began to happen is there was this space that I'm talking about that was created. So I wasn't being triggered. It was creating this space so that it'd be good to see the wisdom and the things that I was going through and why I needed to go through them. So hopefully that answers your question, Shannon. Yeah. I think what sound healing does and what energy work does is it really creates this space so that we're not functioning from this dense energy of fear.
Is it kind of like becoming the observer then, the witness, as opposed to being in it so you can't see it?
Right, and that's really what I think for me fear has been, is that you just get stuck in this dense energy, and that just becomes this feedback loop that just continues to happen over and over and over again. Whereas when you become an observer, the feedback loop stops, and you're able to say, and walk through it.
So what will you be doing for us this evening?
I have, I brought two bowls. there's the solfeggio bowls. One's 528, the frequency of 528, and what's unique about the frequency of 528 is it's actually called the frequency of love. Dr. Horowitz has a website dedicated to the frequency 528, and it's also used to heal DNA, like in genetic laboratories. They actually use it to heal DNA. So it's this powerful frequency. The other one is 417, and that one is to help with transformation and change. So I brought them in, hoping that by doing them both, we might be able to create this space that I talked about.
Is there any kind of intention that the viewer should set, or should just sit and experience it?
Yeah, they can think of something that they have a fear about, some fear that's a part of their life right now.
Okay.
And they may want to think about it. I generally ask people to take 3 deep breaths and think of something that they want healed. And it may be a fear that they're feeling, or it may be an emotion that's too hard and heavy. And then on the 3rd breath, what you want to do is you just want to exhale it and just say thank you to whatever. So in that, you're offering it up to the space that we're creating. Normally, when I do the bowls, I actually open it up to the 4 directions to create a sacred space, because the nature-based tradition is a big part of my process. But I did that prior to the show starting. I opened up the directions, so I won't be doing that. But what I will be doing is I'll be starting the show by clinging these, and then I'll end the show by clinging them to let them know that it's stopped. So once I cling them, they would want to take the 3 breaths. Exhale.
Wonderful.
So this is the 528 frequency, just to let you hear it. And you won't be able to see me playing because I'm going to be putting it in a stool in front of me. This is the 417. These bowls are part of my smaller collection. I actually have bowls that go up to 18 inches. These are 12 and 8 inch. Okay, so if you're watching, if you just want to sit in a chair or lay down, you don't actually need to see me to actually feel the experience. Just get comfortable. I'm going to clang the cymbals. What I want you to do is just take 3 deep breaths. Close your eyes. Feel your body. Think of something that you would like to have healed. One more breath. And on the exhale, just release it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
And Shannon says, I hear you say that grace is like walking with God.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
Kind of fell for a minute there with the sound that sort of like what we were doing. Anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, I just I thank you for having me come on, and I really feel blessed to be able to do this. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see where we're going as a human race and where we're unfolding to, because there's so many beautiful people out there that are listening to their hearts and having the courage to do things that are beyond what we thought we could do. And I'm excited about that.
With the kind of disasters that we've had to face recently, it's really wonderful to be with somebody that feels that positive about it. Maybe the next time we get together, we can talk about that kind of trauma and what it would take to bring the world to a point where people don't even consider that sort of thing as an option.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you again, Jason. Thank you to my viewers. I really appreciate you having all as part of this experience. And in closing then, may all your journeys be truthful till the next time we meet on the Bridge of Truth.